My name's Denis Treacy. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a minute, but what I've been asked to talk about is food safety is a huge topic, food safety culture. There's lots of people here that can help and advise around that, but consumer sensitive issues, the things that people add emotional value to are the things I'd like to talk about. So food safety is a given. You should never question whether your product's going to do you harm or not. What you should question is whether you have trust and belief in the brand. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that today. So a little bit about Culture Compass I'll talk about today. I've picked two particular topics, vegan and halal. There are others, obviously, kosher, organic, vegetarian, etc. But these are the two that I think people need to be most considered around because they are the themes that are growing. They are the things that will make us all make different decisions in the future. I'll talk a little bit about the brand principle. I've been responsible in my 40 years in food manufacturing and FMCG to be responsible for some of the most wonderful brands and some of the most wonderful products that I'm sure you'll agree. I want to talk to you about a little bit about the supply chain as well, securing the supply chain and the risks that we know are relevant, whether it be within internal growing or within our supply chain or with the people that we employ, wherever that may be. In my 40 years, I've settled on 4 key principles. There are, for me, 4 key principles that you need to get right in order to ensure repeatability. I'll share a few snippets of what I believe are important in those areas. And when you think you've got it all right and you realise you haven't because something happens, we'll talk a little bit about crisis management as well. So, a little bit about me. I started my career as a food scientist. I then went into manufacturing, made things for about sort of 7 or 8 years, ran factories, etc. And then I moved into leadership in safety, quality, security, environment, health and safety, etc. Started with the UK, so we had a UK-based business, which was, you may know, United Biscuits. We then grew and we became part of a broader group that involved products manufactured here in Amsterdam and Europe. So most of the time I head across the Zaan to Westzee, to Zaandam, to our factory in the Verkade. When we think about the knowledge and experience that we develop as we grow, just imagine when we take the whole world and we add quality and food safety and we get security experts thinking about food defence. Not just microbiologists, but people who, I've offered close protection to ambassadors in Helmand province. Getting those people to think about our food defence, that's when you take a different level of consciousness, and that's when the leaps forward can happen. So all of that knowledge and effect across a global business gives me the benefit of understanding how that works in Nigeria versus Carlisle in the UK versus Europe versus Pennsylvania in the US, where all of our interests were. And this is, I'm very proud to say, the brains behind everything I will talk about today, a truly global team, built from different cultures, different parts of the world, different ways of thinking, different belief systems, all of which help to ensure we got things and we get things absolutely right. And as I say, some of the brands that I've been very, very proud to represent, to protect, and the consumers of those brands and the employees of those factories that I have kept safe in my 40 years. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about vegan. This is a guy called Izzy. He works in Lyon in the Trafford Centre in Manchester, and 40% of what he sells is specifically requested as vegan products. Can I ask, have we got any vegans in the room? Okay. That's unusual. but... And I was surprised to find out that the UK actually has got a dramatically growing vegan appetite. You know, when you see some of those statistics and you see some of those figures, and you look at what the Vegan Society are looking at, then this is an interesting area. It's not just interesting, actually, it's the future. Just for those of you that I have given permission for all of this information to be shared with anybody who wants it. So you can take these presentations away, you can request them at the end, and you can have all this information. Okay, so I live in Manchester, in the north of England, nestled between Wigan, which is the pie-eating capital of the world, and Bury, which is famous for black pudding. Okay, so this is not a vegan world that I lived in, but now, you know, we have one of the most fantastic vegan restaurants, and veganism is growing rapidly in the north of England. As I said, you know, the home base of the meat-eating population of the UK. The other thing I'd like to talk to you about, and it may or may not be connected, is the growth of Islam. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, growing at an extraordinary rate, and obviously bringing that culture, bringing that those belief systems and those choices, those consumer choices, to a much wider group. So, you know, for those of you that do follow Islam, and in the holy month of Ramadan, obviously, some of you may be fasting. It's permissible not to if you're travelling, of course. But do we have any followers of Islam? Okay. At the back there, hi. So this is the fastest growing religion, and the reason it's the fastest growing is actually the number of people leaving and joining Islam is about the same, but the population is growing because it's a very, very young religion, and the reproducibility rate, so the number of children being born is growing that particular religion. But I'd also like to talk about, also, as well as that, obviously halal. Halal is the permissible. This is the choice of a food that allows you to maintain your belief system. And I'll go back to Bolton, where I've just started. So in 1911, the population of Bolton was about 180,000. It's now 128,000. But we have in Bolton 20 mosques and a growing population that requires and looks for halal products. So these are two things, veganism and halal, which, you know, we need to recognise as the future for all of us. So now I want to talk about trust. So if you believe in something, then you want to ensure that the brand that you choose represents and respects your beliefs. So you can maybe get away with, having a product quality issue. The consumer will maybe come back to you. If you manage that consumer interaction very, very well, then you can actually make a stronger relationship with your consumers out of that. But, you know, if the consumer doesn't trust your brand, then you have no place in representing a belief system, whether it be vegan, vegetarian, kosher, halal, even sustainable, you know. So your brand represents the trust element. You have to get that underpinned. And, of course, trust as well is the first step in ensuring a strong team culture as well. So these things are interrelated. I mean, who would trust their children on a plane? Which one are you going to choose? If you had a choice, Boeing or Airbus? I think that gives you an idea. So I talked about the 4 key principles of ensuring the repeatability. Now I'm going to just step back and just focus on these a little bit. Performance. You get what you inspect, not what you expect. So what you measure is what you return. Policy, we have to have policies. We have to have accreditation systems. We need to know what we're doing. We need to be able to tell people what we're doing, and that's vitally important from that point of view. We have to have structures and organisations. We have to have competency. We have to have well-trained people, people that know what they're doing, people that understand what they're doing right the way through our supply chain, whether they be operators in our factories or consumers or our suppliers or our managers or leaders. We have to have accountability in that area. We also have to have a good, strong culture. Good businesses have got good organisations. They have got good policy structures. They have got good performance. Great businesses have great cultures. And they're the words from some of our best-known leaders. So let me start. I'm just going to use one example for all of you. And I'll just pick one example or a couple of examples from each one. So I'm going to talk about policy. And I'm going to talk about risk assessment. So the first thing you do before you can write a work instruction or a policy or a theme or whatever it may be, you need to understand what your risks are. And, Tom Holland gave us a great example earlier on of understanding exactly what the benefit is of doing what you do. Understanding where your risks are, understanding where you want to remove those risks, but also from a commercial point of view, making that practically applicable and economically viable. So, not only do you need to know where your risks are, but you need to know how to mitigate those risks. So you then put controls in place to ensure that those risks are minimised and if ideally, removed completely. So policy for me is about risk assessment. There are other things, I've just chosen that one to talk to you about. The other thing I'd like to talk to you about is targets, because you can change the way your business behaves by changing what you target. From my point of view, from the experience that I've had and from the successes that I've had, it very much depends on what you target against what you achieve. So I've given you an example there in health and safety. A lot of people measure failure. So you'll measure consumer complaints, or you'll measure incidents, or you'll measure accidents, or lost time accidents. Failure. So the drive to measure the things that you failed on creates a negative culture. It creates what I call a below-the-line culture, and it drives people to find other ways of removing the negatives by maybe dialing them out. Finding a different way of interpreting what we mean by an accident or a consumer complaint. It was a marketing thing, so therefore the consumer wasn't complaining about the product, they were complaining about the marketing idea. Okay, so look for the things that you can measure that are positive, the opportunities. So if you're driving a food safety challenge, energise your teams to look for unsafe conditions. Energise your teams to look for opportunities to improve. Target your personnel, your people, your suppliers on finding things wrong and putting them right before they translate into a product or before they translate into a contamination of your system or whatever it may be. Positive energy into your system will drive the step change. It's the only thing that will drive a step change. You'll improve things by measuring failure, 5, 10, 15, 20%, but you won't make a step change. You won't remove completely risk systems if you don't focus on positives. And I've used this as an example as well. This is a health and safety grid. I've translated it into food safety. A lot of people, energise themselves around product withdrawals or failure. The most catastrophic failure, which is having to recall the product, which tells the world you got it so badly wrong. And there's even worse. You recall a product, then you go back and recall it again because you didn't quite remember what you made, and suddenly you found another couple of SKUs or another couple of date codes. So getting these things wrong undermines the trust that you're trying to convince and compel into your brands. So focus on the little things. Every time somebody loses the end of their finger in a factory, 50 people have cut their finger. So when we say we want to measure every time somebody cuts their finger, and people say, why on earth would you want to do that? Because that prevents the catastrophe. And that's exactly the same with product quality. It's exactly the same thing for food safety. anything that you want to put your focus into, focus on the little things. And of course, it's much cheaper to resolve things on a day-to-day basis than it is to have a major recall. And believe me, I've dealt with a number of recalls. And I remember, going back a few years, we've got a 75,000 tonne factory in Carlisle in the north of England. It flooded, Global warming gave us a flood. I had 9 metres high sewage right the way through my factory, 75,000 tonne factory. Day one, my customers were contacting us and saying, hope everything's okay, no one's been hurt, we're fine. Day 2, they were asking for the product. Day 3, 3 days in, we were being fined for not being on shelf. So the world is against you when you have a crisis. So make sure you try and avoid that as best you can by working through the numbers at the bottom. Okay, supply chain. This world that we live in is growing ever smaller. We understand more and more about who we are and what we do. We relate differently to all of our customers, our consumers. And we are searching further afield for raw materials, for ideas, for suppliers, even for the people that we want to make our products, to work in our factories, to give us our insights. So understand the level of risk that you are looking at. Understand how that changes from your core right the way through to what I call Tier 5. These are my own interpretations after, as I say, my 40 years in the business. Understanding those different levels, understanding how that operates, and understanding that your control and your influence reduces the further you go away from that core. So right the way back to that risk assessment, where are my threats and my vulnerabilities, and how am I going to manage that? So question, do I audit my suppliers and myself personally? Do I rely upon BRC? How much do I trust them? Who do they supply to? Those are the questions that enable you, with the meagre resources that we all have in the quality and safety and technical functions, we have next to nothing. We have to make the best of it. The best of it will be made right back at that risk assessment point. Where are my threats and where are my vulnerabilities? Okay, so culture. As I said already, good businesses have a good business model. They're well organised. They understand their policies. They've got the BRC certifications, their GFSIs, their sustainability. They've got all the certificates on the wall. They know what they think they know. The big step change is culture. Do people understand what they're doing every single day in every single part of the business? And the biggest single effect that I've had on my businesses in changing culture is what I call Goya. Now, it's something we developed with my friends and colleagues in Turkey, part of our Ülker business, and Godiva business, and the McVitie's business. So we looked at the way people get involved. So what I mean by Goya, it's not a Spanish painter. It means, quite simply, get off your arse. Get up, get involved, look at what's going on, engage with your team, with your suppliers, go to your stores, look at how your product's being displayed, talk to your consumers. I had the privilege of being part of a conference when one of the CEOs of IKEA was presenting. And he said, the way I develop my strategy, I put a green coat on, I go to the back of the tills in one of my stores, and I help one of my customers to the car with their product. I say to them, why did you come? How was it? And what are you going to tell people about that event? And then I take that information back and I set my strategy for the whole business. Very simple, but simplicity, is really there for all of us. So I've given you some examples there. We also use little cards, but I'll show you those later. So you've done everything you can possibly conceive. You've risk assessed, you've got the right people, you've trained, you understand your product, you understand your process, you've looked through your supply chain, and then you get the call that says something's gone wrong. again, as I've already said, this is the point at which you can either strengthen your relationship with your consumer or your customer, or when you can really have a big negative impact on it. And you can watch crises unfolding, and you can see businesses that recognise that they've done something that they need to respond to, and you can see the businesses that maybe tell the world that the world's got it wrong and they're just misunderstood. So, for me, there are some very clear determinants. So as soon as that call comes in, the first thing I want to know is it an event or a condition? They're two very different types of issues. So you need to understand what they are, because they will direct you differently. Then, what's our level of exposure? How many defects have we got out there? Is this an issue that's going to be a product quality issue or a food safety issue? Or is it a consumer sensitivity issue? Are we going to undermine the trust that we've got in our brands? Of course, level of complexity. How much time have we got before we need to speak to people? Have we got stock on hold? Is it out in the supply chain? And of course, the other elements, fundamental things like, have you got a crisis team that knows what they're doing and you can enable them immediately? Wherever they are in the world, can you contact them? Do they understand what they've got to do? And do they have the resource in the facilities to do it? And then, of course, communications plan. One of the first actions of a crisis team is to get your brief written, understand what you're going to say when someone sticks a microphone in front of you, wherever you may be, and you need to identify all the people that are likely to get a microphone stuck in front of them and make sure they are absolutely on message, and you get your message sitting in Reuters somewhere, so when someone Googles anything, they get your information, not anybody else's. You leave a vacuum, it will be filled by gossip, half-truths, and opinions. And typical timings, from our point of view, if you've got one SKU, I expect to know everything there is to know about that product in 4 hours. And I'm delighted to say that in some of our factories, we've got some remarkable, in previous business, we had factories in India and Egypt and Saudi that could do that in 12 minutes. With the right systems in place, and I'm sure you've got some sponsors today that can share those kinds of systems with you. If you've got the right systems in place, you can do it in minutes. If you're chasing bits of paper, then 4 hours. And if it's multi-SKUs, so you've made something which goes into something, which goes into something, which goes to lots of customers, then, like for the example I gave you, 150 stock keeping units going to 67 customers, it's a big job, 4 hours to 24 hours. And then understanding what your reaction is and how serious it may be. You need a grid, you need to have scope, you need to know kind of what you're going to be doing. And generally a crisis falls across a number of things, and it depends on the environmental, the environment you're in, or the relationship you've got with your suppliers, to whether that's a serious, whether it's an amber, a red, or a black, stop everything, stop the world eating this product immediately. Okay, so that's the end of that. Just to let you know, I did a webinar on food defence a few weeks ago in preparation for this. I'm also going to be doing a webinar a little bit later on in the year. After this, I'll be talking about food safety culture. For me, as I've already said, culture is the enabler. You get that right, you can make leaps beyond your wildest imaginations in terms of improvements in not just your food safety, but your efficiency, product quality, and all that sort of thing. So I'll be talking about that. I'll talk about my journey. Each one of these photographs is very personal to me, and I'll tell you why when you dial in on the webinar in a few months' time. Okay, so I am here for 2 days. I'm stuck in this room for most of it, thanks to Ahmed, but I will be out and about. I'm sure I'll be having a glass of sparkling water in the bar later on this evening. So please do come and talk to me. But for the moment, questions? It's all very clear then, is it? Fabulous. Anyone got any particular views about the growth of vegan? Anyone supplying into that market? I'm sure that Tom and his teams are, but anybody else? Okay. Anyone? Sorry, Rana.
Dennis, there's an experience that sort of passed at arm's length across Ozo a few weeks ago with a company who've been nameless for obvious reasons, but they were making a vegetarian ready-to-eat salad. Not Tom. I haven't met him before being in this room, just for clarification. And a journalist had phoned the retailer having sequenced a product that was being advertised as vegetarian and found chicken DNA.
Yeah. Okay.
and we've got situations where technologies are not well understood. So they'd found chicken DNA, and they'd reported that they'd found chicken in a vegetarian meal. And they then rang the Vegetarian Society, who were asked the question, can chicken appear in a vegetarian meal? And this made a really good piece of journalism. But it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, the consumer and their understanding. And I'd be just interested to sort of hear your views on how you start to manage those situations where the crisis really has nothing to do with the product. The factory they'd made it in had never touched animal products. How do you start to unwind that?
Well, first of all, investigative journalism is a reality. It's something we all need to recognise. It's probably the thing that keeps us most alert and most on our toes. And rightly so, because we need to be challenged as food manufacturers. We need to be sure that we know what we're doing. We know about that certainly testing for DNA for, things such is absolutely fallible. And so when you recognise that as a risk, so as soon as you say vegan or vegetarian, as soon as you put that message out there, alcohol-free, free from, whatever it may be, then you are setting yourself up for a challenge, okay? Which is why some businesses choose not to label their products. We didn't label our products in McVitie's or anyone else halal, but when you look on our website, you can find that our products are across the board halal, so it's safe for anybody who has that belief system, including kosher. And those of you that have been through that accreditation process know there are 400 different accreditation bodies for halal. If you're kosher, depends which rabbi turns up on the day as to what they want to look for, what they drive as, what they regard as being important. So the first thing to do, back to risk assessment. What will somebody challenge us on, and what is our response to that challenge? So if a journalist calls and says, "We've just done a test," the response is going to be, "That's absolutely impossible, and I'll tell you why it's impossible." So what I would recommend you do before you do anything else, just go back and validate those checks that you've done. Talk to the people that have given you that result. Understand where they are, because when you publish this and you get it wrong, we'll be coming after you. We're stacked up, locked and ready to go, because we are absolutely 100% clear that when we say vegetarian, we are vegetarian, and we are bulletproof. Now, you can only get that bulletproof if you get those 4 elements right. You've got to have policy, you've got to measure, you've got to know what you're measuring, you've got to have the organisation in place so that at any level, the response is the right response, but you've got to have a culture where you just simply know. And from my point of view, test the products that I made over 40 years and challenge anything against anything, and I'll stand up in court next to you, or I'll see you in a debate in the media world and tell you why we're absolutely clear. Okay.
Thank you, Denis.
Hi.
Another question or a new challenge now with new social media. We talk about information, but for example, you can find thousands of videos on YouTube about curcuma, saying that curcuma will save your life, and thousands of videos that curcuma will kill you. So with fake news, we have another aspect of the
Yeah.
importance of culture and a strong culture to avoid this.
Yeah, and you know, if you've got an investigative journalism, if you've got a journalism that wants to expose or wants to challenge, and I think it's right that we are challenged. I think, you know, you have to understand your product and you have to understand your process. And if there are 20 chocolate manufacturers in the world, just make sure that you're not the one that we go for, that they will go for, because you've got robust processes in place, as I know you have in Leonidas, as I had in Godiva, as I had we made 40,000 tonnes of chocolate in Manchester for our chocolate biscuits, one of the biggest chocolate producers in the UK, under McVitie's. So we know, and it's about sourcing. It's not just about food safety and food integrity. It's about sourcing as well. So what we do ethical? You know, do we make sure that we understand our supply chain? Am I being supplied from factories in a country where they padlock the fire escapes? You know, those are the kinds of things you don't even think about. That's where your supply chain's at risk. So from my point of view, as long as you know your product, you know your story, you know your systems and processes, then you can defend any challenge, whether it's a robust one or fake news. John. Needs no introduction. Mr. Carter.
Dennis, yeah. I was thinking about what's happening to our industry a little bit, and I think we've known each other for a while, Dennis, and I have a boss at the moment who says, among other things, mass is dead. So, you know, we work for big food.
Yeah.
And many of the people in the room work for big food. And the growth tends to be coming now from startups. You mentioned vegan, obviously. That's an area where there's a lot of energy and very, very many small companies who maybe don't have the depth of knowledge or experience or resources that we have in big food. And I think there's two questions in my mind. One is that the food safety standards between, you know, the traditional players who come to these conferences and know each other for 20 years or whatever, and these guys is big.
Yeah.
But also that the public is holding us to different standards. So the effect of a failure of a Danone or a McVitie's is huge on the brand. The effect of failure on a startup or a small guy is there's a different tolerance for that. So I guess the two questions is, one is, do you see that as a big risk? And second is do you see this kind of split in tolerance of the consumers of big food versus startup food?
No, I don't see it. There can be no threats because this is all opportunity. You know, Tom talked about being a disruptor. And with the business, the world needs disruption in order to keep it energised. So when I joined United Biscuits in 1988, we made digestive biscuits, McVitie's chocolate digestive biscuits, in one big factory in Harlesden in London. And guess what? We had beef fat in that product then, you know. We chose to evolve that product to make it more suitable to a wider audience. Now, if you follow Islam, you can include, or you're a vegan, you can include McVitie's products in your diet. You know, as I say, when I first started, we made it in one factory. We now make McVitie's digestives in Jeddah, in Istanbul, in Kazakhstan, in Cairo, and a few others, Romania, and Lagos in Nigeria. So those products are manufactured now. There is no difference in the food quality and food safety standards of those, because if you're a grazing consumer and you leave England and you go to Nigeria and you see a packet of McVitie's digestives on the shelf, you automatically resonate with that product. So that product's got to be exactly what you expect it to be. So it's not a threat, it's an opportunity. And if big businesses don't want to be disrupted, they need to disrupt for themselves. I think we're out of time now. Okay, so
if you've got a big video, you've got a meeting next.
So if you've got a pink lanyard, you've got a meeting. Other than that, guys, we've got a bit of a networking session now. So don't forget what I said. You know, it's an opportunity to network. The things that you will stay with you from these sessions are the people that you will meet. So make connections, make contacts, and share business cards, swap phone numbers, and grow your network and enjoy. Thank you.
So.